Hello there, welcome back to the Closet Historian. Today we're going to talk a little bit more about adventure style. So how do I define adventure style? What makes an outfit, an ensemble, adventurous? And of course, khaki is always a bonus, is always a plus. Something about khaki, just automatically, people have the association of like Banana Republic and Safari, and that's just immediately where your head goes if you see like a pocket sauna shirt, khaki shirt kind of thing, or like an all khaki outfit. It just automatically looks a little bit like summer camp or like zookeeper or safari. Those are like all the kind of associations that you have with khaki. So it's like an outdoorsy it lends itself to an outdoorsy feel, just even when it's tailored. So of course khaki is always a bonus, but I really don't think that you have to have khaki, a certain set of colors, details, textures in order for something to be adventure style. They just help get there. So I will mention some specific things to look out for if you are going after this sort of style, but I really think you can style almost anything, especially vintage anything, to look more adventurous depending on what accessories you choose and how you pair things. So I think adventure style is much more of a vibe than a specific set of things. So I think you can definitely lend a vibe to your outfit without having to have the things I'm going to mention today. After my last video where I put together those 16 adventure ready outfits for you, I'll put a card up to that video as well if you've somehow missed it, even though I do just keep rambling on about it. But in any case, I'm really proud of that video, so go and check it out if you haven't seen it and you're interested in this sort of style. But I just wanted to go over my personal views on adventure style today and give you my tips and like the items that I look out for, the elements that I look out for when I'm building a more safari-ready adventure sort of style look. I'm going to stick to three main sections here, talking about inspiration, where I get my inspiration for adventure-ready looks, and then also talking about colors and textures and materials, things that I find really lend themselves to a safari-ready or adventure style look. And then lastly, I'll talk about particular items that you might want to look out for if you're interested in building a part of your wardrobe to be leaning more adventurous, I suppose. So beginning with inspiration, how do I get inspired to put together adventure-ready, safari-ready, travel-ready looks? And of course, I've put together a Pinterest board over the years. I actually just took all my pins from all my different boards and put them into one adventure-style board so that all of you could browse them all together in one place. I think there are probably some repeats in this board because I really did just go into each of my different Pinterest boards and took all the adventure-ish ones and put them in one board. So sorry if there are a lot of repeats in there, but I will link to that Pinterest board in the description below. So if you too want to go and browse those images and get inspired, you most certainly can. I wanted to make that available to you guys. But really there's pictures on there from modern films like The English Patient, The Painted Veil, Indiana Jones series, of course, Adele Blanc-Sec, Allied, films like that. And then also films like from the past, like Mogambo, which is more like safari styled with Grace Kelly, and like Casablanca. There's a lot of films from the 1930s, 40s, and 50s that were also set in like, various African countries or the jungle or things like that, where they have really good safari or adventure style outfits that are from the time period when the film is being made, obviously. So it's good vintage safari wear there in older films. And actually, if you guys have any more adventurous films from the past, do leave those in the comments below because I'm always looking for more style inspiration in this regard. You'll also notice a lot of images on there of runway fashion. A lot of times, runways are built to be almost like a show with a narrative. So a lot of times it will seem like they've set it to be in a, fantasy situation. So they'll have like looks that are very aviatrix or very safari looking. And so a lot of high fashion is a good place to look if you are necessarily, you're not going to buy that $3,000 suit, but you might want to take inspiration of how they've paired it with dark brown or how they've paired khaki with like a chili pepper red or something like that. A lot of good color and texture inspiration comes out of runway fashion, even if the look isn't very vintage. So I always look at modern runway shows just so I can see new pairings of colors, new pairings of textures. And so I've put all the modern fashion that I think is adventure ready here in this Pinterest board as well. And speaking of high fashion, I find a lot of high fashion magazine editorials often again use this sort of narrative idea of like, oh, the model is on safari or the model is on a cruise. So you can see how they would style different modern fashion, sometimes in a much more vintage way. A lot of times in like the 2008 to 2012 zone, which is when I fell in love with high fashion. And then once they left the vintagey bits, I left them. But it was a much more vintagey inspired time in high fashion. So a lot of editorials from back then have a very vintage edge to them and are very useful for us vintage gals looking to put together inspired outfits for a more adventure ready look. And then of course there are candids from, people from the 30s, 40s, 50s, either on safari, traveling, or just dressing like they should be on safari or traveling, dressing for the outdoors, dressing for, a chic museum visit. And all of those I have also put into this Pinterest board that I think work for like visiting, the museums in Cairo as opposed to just, going on safari down further into, the jungle. I also like to consider environmental inspiration. So being inspired by environment, a place, a particular location, a particular city, a particular like vibe of a different place, even if that's like only my fantasy version of that place. Imagining what I would wear to the Blue Mosque, imagining what I would wear to go visit the pyramids, even though I don't get to go to those travel destinations. It's nice to build outfits around thinking what would look good there. I often build outfits based on how I think it will look with a backdrop because I've been a fashion blogger for several years. So when I'm putting together ensembles, if I know I'm going to visit a museum that has like very like gray stone walls, I will build some like an outfit knowing that I will have like a mostly gray stone background, and I will choose colors that I know will go with that because usually I'm taking pictures, but you don't have to take pictures and be a fashion blogger to build outfits this way. Just imagining like if you're going, to dinner at a certain place, if you're going to a certain like botanic garden or whatever you're doing that day, if you're going to work, boring, but necessary. You can imagine what the setting will look like and what your outfit would look like within it. So choosing a color that will contrast, choosing a color that will blend in. This is kind of using the environment as inspiration for building ensembles. It's something I do quite often, especially when I'm traveling. So when I'm like actually traveling, which isn't often, but every once in a while I actually go places. So for example, when I knew I would be going to the Anatomy Museum in Paris, I wanted to make sure I wore an outfit that I thought would go well with that space. I will literally look at pictures of the space beforehand and build an outfit based on like the vibe of that environment. So I know that it will fit and the eventual pictures will look nice. And like, again, I know not everyone takes pictures, but I think this is still a good way to plan your outfits, even for like the experience of the day. So you feel like you sort of blend in with an environment. It's a very theatrical way of doing things, I understand. But, this is a vintage fashion channel. It's a theatrical place. As for colors and textures and materials that I recommend looking out for, of course, I'm going to recommend you stick with more natural materials like cotton, linen, and silk, like I always seem to do here on the channel. They just look a little bit more vintage appropriate, and especially they look more appropriate for adventure style, because when we're looking for like a more safari inspired outfit, we're looking at things that are meant for tropical climates, humid climates, hot climates, and of course cotton, linen, those are more breathable fabrics and are more likely to be something that makes sense in that sort of style. And that's why, again, I will recommend natural fibers as usual. But also when it comes to colors, an ivory, khaki, tan, beige palette is very common for safari looks and for adventure style, but I don't think you have to focus only on neutrals. Personally, I think, infusing looks with more tropical colors and brighter colors for a more like beachy and tropical influenced safari style is very fun. Or like looking into rich jewel tones, like the colors of the spices at a market or in a rug or in ceramic tiles around the Mediterranean. Like I think those rich jewel tones also look really great in safari or adventure ready style as well. So you don't have to stick to neutrals. It's very much the traditional khaki, khaki green, ivory. Those are like probably the three main colors of adventure style, but you don't have to stick to them. You can expand into more fun colors as well, I think. As far as textures go, I of course am going to recommend cotton twill. If you watched that last video, you notice that nearly everything I have in my safari wardrobe is made out of cotton twills. It's what khaki pants are made out of. It's the association of cotton twill to me is definitely like safari style. So I always think like a twill dress or skirt or anything made out of twill has a bit more of a hardy and like outdoorsy feel to it just by nature, because twill is a hardy fabric. It's what denim is made out of. It's very like wear resistant or like stain resistant weave. So it's often used for outdoorsy things. And that's why I think it gives a good rugged adventure vibe. Gauzes and silks, by contrast, can give a soft, desert-appropriate diaphanous quality to an outfit. Details like distressing, rich leathers, bone or horn buttons, top stitching, and lots of pockets, again, add a more traditional safari flair. And tourist scarves or map print things, jewelry, especially jewelry from like other cultures, or like jewelry from like your travels, or even if you haven't traveled, jewelry from somebody's travels, and make a whole look feel well-traveled and unique. I also like tooled leathers or like faux crocodile skin belts and shoes, canvas and leather like combination things like these shoes from Royal Vintage, and also like straw as a material, again, another natural material for hats and for handbags as well. All natural materials help with the adventure and outdoorsy vibe. Even if you're wearing like a very structured suit, if it's in a textured linen with like worn with embossed leather, it just looks a little bit more traveler ready. I don't know. You look like you're getting on a much smaller plane for some reason. It just how it works. I don't know why. Now, when it comes to specific items to look out for, of course, the first thing I'm going to recommend is a classic safari camp shirt in khaki, either in khaki, traditional khaki, like tan khaki, or in green khaki as well. I just think a cotton camp shirt or safari shirt like this is just the most classic piece of safari style, and therefore works styled more formally for more, quieter adventures, and then also styled very casually with like jeans or like khaki pants and flats or boots to go out actually into the wilderness. So I think this works both styled up more formally and then styled back down. So you can find these at the thrift store usually quite easily, just because safari style was in such demand, or was part of fashion in the 1980s and like early 90s. There was like actually in the 70s too. There's been a lot of safari fashion revivals over the years, so you can usually find safari camp shirts at the thrift store. Or at least I find quite a few of them, so I assume that they're out there in other places as well. And then because safari style does come back into fashion every once in a while, you can usually find shirts like these quite easily, even from like modern retailers. So a shirt like this is going to serve you so well in an adventure ready wardrobe. So I really think that is the number one item on the adventure style things to get list. You can also get a safari-ish blouse in the same sort of style, but in a like looser, more like flowy silk as well, which is really nice because it's just, again, the same sort of idea, but a little bit more formal, so you can dress it up a little bit more. I still think you can dress them down too. I've shown that here on the channel as well. But again, I find these thrifting most of the time. But either way, like more traditional cotton shirt or a silk version of this, having a safari blouse or 7, if you're me, I think is quite an essential when it comes to building an adventure style section of your wardrobe. And then back to me harping on about cotton twill. I think having a cotton twill skirt in either a pleated or like A-line or pencil, any style that you like, but just having that rugged cotton twill, possibly with some pockets even, is going to, in a skirt, is going to serve you really well, again, in creating more adventure-ready looks. Again, I found this one, for example, at the thrift store, and I've made some over the years as well. Cotton twill is a pretty easy fabric to find if you do know how to sew. They do have some at Joann's, which is where I normally get my cotton twills, is either Joann's or moodfabrics.com. Moodfabrics.com does have a really nice organic cotton twill that comes in some really nice darker jewel tones as well. So I usually try and buy that one if I can, if I have the budget for it, because of course at Joann's you can use a coupon, which does make things cheaper sometimes. So both those are the two places I get my cotton twills from, and then I do sometimes find items at the thrift store again as well. We all know how I like to thrift on this channel now. Another item that is a super classic of all style and modern style and vintage style in general, and is a great piece to incorporate into your adventure style looks as well, is a trench coat. They have that very much like sending off your lover at the end of Casablanca vibe. You can't, and it's more of a film noir version of this look, but the junction of film noir and safari style, that's a nice place, I think. So I think a trench coat is a great piece to consider adding to your adventure ready wardrobe as well. As for accessories, we all know how I like to collect accessories in matching sets here on this channel. So I think the most important sets to have are going to be like ivory, dark brown, and then cognac brown, like a really rich tan leather accessory set. I think is probably the most important one when it comes to adventure style. So having like shoes, handbag, belt in this color leather, I think really lend themselves to creating an adventure ready look. So that's probably the most important accessory set I would recommend getting if you're interested in building more safari or adventure style looks. And the last little item that I've really enjoyed adding to my own adventure ready looks over the past couple of years are like small silk scarves. Something about them, like tied at the neck or like on the wrist or on a bag, just really, I don't know, lend a very Mogambo touch. I noticed when I watched that film that both Grace Kelly and Ava Gardner had these little scarves tied on all the time, and it's just something about having a little scarf seems very like adventure camp. I don't know. I think it adds like a nice little vintage touch to an outfit. So the last little thing I would recommend are small silk scarves, but I know that's kind of a silly one. Now, before I wrap up completely here and send you over to that inspiration board to get a few more ideas, I do just want to touch on something maybe a little bit, I don't know, touchy here at the end of this video as well, just because it's something that I realized a little while back while wearing outfits like this and talking about adventure style over on my blog. And I will link to a blog post down in the description about this topic, which links to a few more articles about it as well, because it is something that has come up in the fashion world before. And that is the fact that safari style in general and a lot of like adventure styled looks like archaeologist style or safari style is something that came out of it has a darker past, like so many things do. It's not problematic. Safari, for example, as the most innocent of this, in a way. Safari now, people go on safari to admire and appreciate animals, but in the past, people went on safari as trophy hunters to, kill a lion as opposed to appreciate a lion. So safari style will always have started with people going out to hunt animals as opposed to appreciate them. So like that's the dark history there. And there are still people, because for some reason rich dudes have a god complex, who still go out and kill beautiful, gorgeous animals to mount on their wall. So that is still actually a component of safari style in some ways. And so hopefully people don't see a safari styled outfit and think great white hunter. They think safari style, but that is somewhat of a newer development. Safari style used to be what you wore to go and kill animals as opposed to go and appreciate them. And that's like the milder history of this, because also encompassed in like a khaki military uniform and a pith helmet it's the image of a conqueror or of a thief in some ways. A lot of this style in interior design, they call it campaign furniture. They call it colonial, this sort of safari-ish style. And that's because European countries and powers invaded a lot of places where they needed uniforms that would work in warm weather. And like, that's where a lot of the elements of this style come from. The amazing artifacts in, say, like the British Museum, for example, a lot of those things were not, given or taken home with permission. A lot of that kind of stuff in museums across the world was just straight up stolen. So even like archaeologists and people we think of, not necessarily as murderers or military sort of people, there still was a history of plunder in adventure style in some ways. And so I think that while that is no longer the association with this style anymore, which is good, thanks to even like films like Indiana Jones, where he literally does go to other cultures and steal their stuff and bring it back. But that still creates a much more fun and like less dark history around this sort of style. But that doesn't mean that history isn't still there. And I think it's important to acknowledge that these items do have, a history, especially when it comes to vintage fashion or any fashion really. Styles do have a past, have a history, have an origin, and they're not always the nicest. And this can be said, this makes it seem like, should we even wear like campaign or colonial inspired styles today when it does have such a bloody past? And to me, I think it's easier to understand when I think about like, why do I still wear safari adventure style, even though I know perhaps it is the image of like my worst ancestors in some ways. And that is because like when I think of a 1950s dress, the political implications behind that aren't great either. And I still wear, 1950s, 40s fashion, even though like the patriarchal norms of that time are not something I agree with either. So I really don't agree with the politics behind a 1950s house dress, and I don't agree with the politics behind like a pith helmet either, but yet I still wear both of these styles. And so that's kind of how I reconcile the darker history of adventure style, is thinking about how everything, when you looked closely, is problematic, including regular vintage clothing. A lot of people assume, if you dress traditionally, you have traditional values, which is definitely not the case for me. And I know for many people who like vintage style, that is not the case. So that's kind of how I reconcile this topic or this history of adventure style with my more, I guess, liberal worldview. For those of you who didn't know, I have one of those. Because I do think it's important to know that history, that past, especially, I don't think it's as much of a problem, like if you were in the United States, for example, wearing a safari outfit, but you may not want to wear like a full-on circa 1900 colonial outfit while on safari in Africa. Like, it just seems a little bit culturally insensitive to show up looking like the great white hunter. So I think there's a time and a place for different styles. It's sort of like similar in some ways to the discussion around cultural appropriation when it comes to fashion. I think this is an adjacent sort of topic. And again, I'll link to the blog post where I talked about this before, so you can read some other people's opinions in the comments of that blog post as well. And if you have any opinions on this sort of like, should we wear things that are, charged in some ways still today, leave those in the comments below, but do try and be civil about it. We can have hopefully a nice open and interesting discussion as opposed to a combative one. But sorry about ending this video on a little bit of a downturn there. So those are my thoughts on adventure style. Probably a few more thoughts than you thought you had signed up for. But, you know, I wanted to cover everything from colors to colonialism in this video. Just touch on, you know, a little bit of everything really. But I hope you guys enjoyed my last video with all of those adventure-ready outfits. I just wanted to talk about it a little bit more today, just to really go over what the heck adventure style even is, and hopefully we now have a better idea altogether. Thank you, as always, for tuning in today, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.